Harry, just so you're aware, we are now live on YouTube.
Got it. Thank you, Caroline. I'll give it another half a minute here just to see if anybody else is popping on. Then I'll introduce John.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Harry.
Hi, John. How are you?
Good.
Good.
I was going to say, Zoom only clobbered me a couple times when I was testing earlier.
Okay. All right. Fingers crossed, John, that it will.
It gave me a second way to try if the first way doesn't, but hopefully the
Okay.
first way works fine.
All right. Good, good. So I think we're coming right up to 7 o'clock here. All right. According to my laptop, it's 7. So so we'll get started. Great. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us on our last Thursday Night Nature Talk for the season. My name's Harry Vogel. I'm the senior biologist and the director here at the Loon Preservation Committee. And it's my pleasure this evening to introduce John Rockwood, an outstanding loon photographer and videographer, and also a valued LPC volunteer and member for many years. John has been our eyes and ears on Massabesic Lake in southern New Hampshire since the early 2000s. He's been taking photographs for many years. He's even published a book, Adventures with Grape Nut, which we are happy to carry here in our shop and even in our online store. And more recently, John has been shooting video of loons as well. And I'm looking forward, as I do every year, to seeing his presentation. If anybody has questions for John during his presentation, please write those in the chat, and we will have an opportunity to answer those after John's presentation. And Caroline will be monitoring that. We'll be able to feed those questions to John. And after John's presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about LPC's work for New Hampshire's loons this year. So with that, John, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, we'll get started. Let's see if they'll let me share. Okay. Oh. Hello. I'm hoping everyone's hearing something because I don't get to hear anything.
John, I don't have audio just yet.
Okay. Hang on, I'll see if
We're doing is fine.
that's yeah, this thing's annoying. All right, let me stop the share and we will try it again. As I say, it was having problems this afternoon, and Zoom admitted they were having problems. Share sound. Yes, we have sound turned on in the video clip. Let me try the other way they suggested. Audio should be on. Okay.
New Hampshire Chronicle captured all sightings on the lake in Moultonborough.
I'm hoping everyone hears sound.
Yep.
We will put it together. Do you hear sound, Harry?
I do. Great.
Okay. The homecoming. Again, before we get too far in, I want everyone to know that I use an 840 millimeter equivalent lens, or rather one of the larger lenses. And when I'm taking video, we're shooting at anywhere from 50 to 90 times. Your normal binoculars are right around 10 to 12 power. So normally, most of the books I've seen claim that the male chooses the nesting site. Well, on Lake Massabesic, I've seen about 15 nesting pairs over the years, and it's always the female who picks the nesting site. This is a female on the left going up on the nest. She's been banded so we can tell who she is. The male is throwing sticks and leaves up for her to rearrange.
Lead fishing tackle. It is
Again, this one is on Lake Massabesic. This pair, unfortunately, did not create any little ones for us this year. Again, as you can see, the water has gone down. This is a different lake out in the reeds and things, somewhere out in the very open, so they would have been warm. This was Grape Nut's mother. This was about halfway through her nesting cycle. Unfortunately, the water had dropped almost 2 feet, and this is shot again from a kayak hand out, and it was quite windy that day. So you will see how hard it is for her to get up to the nest. This was actually her last attempt. The water kept going down, and she no longer had the strength to get up there. At this point, she was about 15 years old. Again, she gets up there and basically turns the eggs and collapsed. And she stayed prone for about the next half an hour until she would then at that point get up and turn around so she could face the water. Now the loon chicks are going to be from 1 to 4 days old. This is my little friend Grape Nut. Please do not approach any of these loons. These were basically taken again with a large lens and then Photoshop to bring them in closer. When there's twins, sometimes they don't get along and one parent will carry each on their back. And these little guys float like a cork. That nice little down looks more like cat fur. One chick is born usually a day, sometimes 2 days before its twin. The firstborn usually ends up being the alpha. The alpha, unfortunately, will attack the beta and show it who's in charge. The funny thing is, quite often, if you only see one of the pairs riding on an adult's back, it's usually the younger one. The alpha is busy showing off for his twin, while the beta gets to ride and take it easy. Again, the bands help us tell who's male and female. Otherwise, we'd have to go by the yodeling or the tremolo. A lot of times, one will be hiding under the wings, the other sitting in plain sight. Again, the nice red eye. A couple times I've shown my pictures and videos at some of the camera clubs, and they always complain that it has red eye. They assume it's like with people, you get the red eye from a flash. Well, we don't use a flash, and I go out of my way to try and capture the red eye. Now, for the first couple days, the chicks tend to stay more on the backs than in the water. They're spending most of the time eating and sleeping. Again, a little one, sometimes you'll find them all alone. They really haven't been abandoned, so please do not chase them and do not pick them up. What happens is the parents go off either to find food for the chick or to chase invaders out of their territory, other loons and things. Again, here I am, comes out to show that he's still around. Now, they grow fairly fast for the first couple weeks. If you spent a week or so away from them, you'd see them almost double in size for that first week or two. Now they're 9 to 10 days old, 9 to 12 days, excuse me. They'll hang around together when the parents aren't around. At this point, they're starting to get too big to both be on a parent at the same time. And up comes the female. Sometimes she'll bring fish back with her, sometimes she won't. She really wants the little ones to start practicing diving. On some lakes, the little chicks will actually be catching their own fish by this age. Female brings back the fish, offers it to the alpha chick first. If the alpha chick is full, then she goes to the beta chick. By trouble, we mean various animals and other things that bother the loons, the eagle especially, and they also on Lake Massabesic complain about the low-flying airplanes. For some reason, they equate them with eagles. The jets they've learned not to react to, but the low-flying planes they still do. On the left is the male with his yodel. He stretches out almost flat on the water. A plane is flying overhead. Female will start getting into the act with her tremoloing. Instead of lying out flat, she stretches her neck. A part of the yodel and the tremolo is not just for their own sake. They're also trying to warn the other loons on the lake that something is coming. On Lake Massabesic, we tend to have anywhere from 7 to 8 pairs of nesting loons each summer. Lake Massabesic is 2,500 acres. Our great blue heron, they'll unfortunately take a chick. This is Grapenut's mother coming in. This amazed me. She was quite willing to take on the great blue heron, and she almost got him. She was quite happy with herself after that point. Again, the eagles, we tend to have more each year in New Hampshire. This particular sequence is at Pawtuckaway. This is the male. Again, he's banded, otherwise I wouldn't know. The male and the female and the little one here had been hiding up against the shore. When the eagle flew off, they came out. Again, I'm taking this video at about somewhere between 80 and 90 power. So they're about 50 feet from my kayak. At this point, the little one's starting to get restless. It had been sleeping the whole time the eagle was in the area. Again, the nice red eye. The chicks have brown eyes. Their eyes will not turn red until they're about 2 years old, while they're on the ocean, before they even think about coming back to fresh water. At this point, he's probably somewhere between 2 and 3 days old. This was, for the people from Pawtuckaway, this was the northern pair a few years ago. Now we're back on Lake Massabesic. The adult was going off to chase an intruder. Again, the parents tend to leave them alone. A lot of times they'll hide them in the reeds. Now this is a penguin dance. Again, this is when the loons are quite mad. A lot of times they'll put on semi-mock battles just to let the intruders know that they're really willing to fight and they will push them out. Oftentimes nothing physical happens. The loon on the left is wing rowing, chasing again an intruder. Now, when they are invading or visiting other territories, they usually come as a pair. Sometimes they'll come singly. Again, a lot of times the battles last all of, one rising up out of the water, and that's about it. Feeding. Again, the adults take turns bringing back fish, little minnows, for the first few weeks. Again, they'll offer it to the alpha chick first. A lot of books, they'll tell you they bring them back live and let them go for the chick that chase. In the last 21 years of visiting with loons, I've never seen that happen. They've always handed it to the chick, no matter what age. Once in a while, the male and female will bring back fish that are too big. This is a female, and here comes the male with an even bigger fish. Again, they want to show that they caught something. The male now sneaks off to eat his fish rather than give it to either one. And yes, the adults can swallow fish while they're underwater. Now, the female is still trying to give it away. The male gets impatient. He comes over and says, "Give it to me and I'll take care of it." However, he had no intentions of sharing. A lot of people will tell you that the loon's head is black. It's really an iridescent green. Kind of depends on what the lighting is. Sometimes it will actually look blue as well. This is a female at Pawtucket. This little battle lasted close to 15 minutes. We've cut out a few minutes worth, like most of it. It amazed me that she could swallow a fish this large. At this point, I didn't think it was going to work. The other thing that amazed me, I figured that would satisfy her for at least 2 or 3 days. Well, the next day she ate one even bigger. I just don't have video of it. Crayfish. The little chicks don't really know what to do the first couple of times with crayfish because sometimes they pinch them. Again, wing rowing. They can move quite fast, but it uses lots and lots of energy. Sometimes they'll run and flap, not necessarily to take off, just to get from one point to another quickly. This is a juvenile. This was in the fall, about the middle of November one year. He kept at this for 3 or 4 days before he actually got airbound. Back at Pawtucket, this was one of the southern adults. It was visiting the pair from the north. Then he heard his mate calling, so he was running down the water and trying to get airborne, but there was very little wind that day. He finally made it. Now, marking, I'd never heard or seen this until a few years back. This is one of the males. There were 2 twins that were both male. They were hanging out with their father at this point. And they've seen their father get up on the beach and mark his territory. This little guy's practicing. There's his brother and male commenting on it. As they were older and now juvenile, the male had marked further to the left. This is the alpha chick, who's far from a chick these days, but he's going up to do his marking on the beach. Big feet he has. And here he comes. Now he comes up next to his brother to encourage his brother to go up and mark a different part of the beach. Again, I haven't ever seen this mentioned. I have not read about it. I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it. I will show you a little underwater swimming. This was, again, taken on Lake Massabesic. This is a reservoir. There's no swimming there. I have to stick 2 underwater video cameras, one on each side of a kayak, and hope I get something. So for probably about 10 hours worth of underwater video, I probably have all 2 minutes worth of usable video. And this was Grape Nut's mother. You can tell by her bands. One of her chicks had gotten lost during an invasion, and we found him crying up on shore. So she went fishing literally right under my kayak to catch him some breakfast. Unlike penguins, their cousins, they only use their feet to swim. Here's the 2 twins. And Ma right above them. The water at this point is about 5 to 6 feet deep. A lot of times if you're sitting on the lake in a boat or a kayak, especially around July and August, if you're sitting there long enough, the fish sometimes will hide in the shade that your vessel is making. And all of a sudden you'll hear splashing and you may see a loon swim under your boat chasing the fish. These guys usually only stay underwater for about 30 seconds at a time. Juvenile practicing, doing a little wing stretching. If you'll notice, this one's missing about a 1/4 inch of its top bill. Towards November, it starts losing the iridescent green head. To show you that the little ones start practicing flying real early. These guys are 2 and 3 days old. The alpha is showing off for his twin. Grooming. The loons spend hours, it seems, every day grooming. Part of it is they're pulling out old feathers. The other thing is they're spreading oil. They have an oil gland by their tail. Unfortunately, the chick is not wanting to get off. The poor adult is having problems spreading the oil and getting at it. Finally decides to tip over to get rid of the little guy. Now sometimes you see the loon in the distance and 2 funny little bodies. The chicks are now too big to get on the back, but they want to sleep under the wings. This was census day. I was expecting only 6 loons in my area. This was 2 hours before the census. So we had all the loons on my half of the lake were being visited by most of the 8 from the other side of the lake. This is the fall. This is one of the twins. And here's his brother. And they left that year and at the end of December. Again, the music, we had the music because there was too much noise from boats and the local planes and the highway right near us. And let me see if I can stop this. Alrighty. Oops. Okay.
Great.
And that's my piece of the show.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And I will start to
I don't
share.
hear anything.
Oh,
Oops, hang on. Oh,
there we go. Good. Thanks, John. I'm going to start to share my screen and get ready to set up, but I'm sure that Caroline probably has some questions.
Yeah, there are a
Chat.
couple questions coming in via YouTube. And if anyone watching in Zoom has questions, please do put them in the chat. We have a couple minutes for questions for John now. But there's a question about photography and what time of the day do you get the most of your photos? And do you have any advice for photographers in terms of what the best time with lighting is or things like that?
I try and get on the water just as the sun is coming up. Again, I'm looking for the sun to be at an angle producing the red eye. So I'm usually, right now, because it's stays dark a little longer, I'm on the water by 6. And the beginning of the season, early June and things, I'm on the water before 5 and hoping no one's running me over when it's foggy out there. Again, I use Canon products. I use a Canon 7D Mark II with a 100 to 400 millimeter lens with the 1.4 extension. So that's how they come up with the 860 millimeter description. Now, there are people who will go take pictures in the afternoon as the sun's going down. Again, that can produce the red eye for them.
Great. And it looks like the rest of our comments, both here in Zoom and on YouTube, are just compliments on your presentation. So that was a really great presentation. Thank you so much.
All right. I thank everyone for tuning in.
Great. Thank you, John. That was fantastic. And of course, you're a hard act to follow. But this part of the night might be a little bit more dry, but I'd like to talk a little bit about LPC's work this summer to help loons cope with some of the challenges that they are facing, and also present some preliminary results to give everybody a sense of what kind of a year it was for loons this year. All right. So to start at the beginning, the Loon Preservation Committee was created in 1975 because people had noticed that loons had become less common on our lakes. And the thinking at that time was that if human activities had contributed to those declines, and it seemed likely that they had, then human activities, if they were thoughtful and coordinated, could reverse those declines once again. And that's the philosophy and the hope on which the Loon Preservation Committee was created. Our mission is to restore and maintain a healthy population of loons throughout the state, to monitor the health and the productivity of loons and loon populations as sentinels of environmental quality, indicators of the health of our lakes and ponds, and to promote a greater understanding and a wider appreciation of loons in the larger natural world. The Loon Center here in Moultonborough is our headquarters and our visitor center, but LPC carries out programs of monitoring and research and management and education throughout the state. We're helped in those efforts by close to 1,000 volunteers throughout the state. So here are a number of those volunteers at a Raft and Sign Building Day on Earth Day this April. And as you can see, a little snow did not deter these hardy friends of loons. We also have a small but dedicated staff. And every year we hire a number of seasonal field biologists to help us monitor and manage loons on lakes throughout the state. This is our lineup for 2021, appropriately distanced. And together, our members and volunteers and staff do several things. And the first thing that we do is we count loons. And we count loons because that gives us our first indication of problems with our loon population. And it's also the ultimate measure of our success in keeping these birds common in the state. So we've been monitoring loons since 1975. And over that span of years, we have actually created the longest running and the most comprehensive database on any loon population in the world right here in New Hampshire. So here are our North Country biologist, Owen McGovern, and our Seacoast biologist, Olivia Fortuna, looking for loons this year on 2nd Connecticut Lake. So this year, LPC volunteers and staff monitored 350 lakes throughout the state. And not all of those lakes have loons, but all of them have the potential to have loons. And we hope that more of them will have loons in the future. We deal with that large number of lakes by carving the state up into these different monitoring regions. And then we have a biologist each on Squam and Winnipesaukee. And in the past years, we have been working with a biologist from the Umbagog Wildlife Refuge to count loons up on Umbagog. And it's one thing to say that our loon populations are increasing or they're decreasing, but we also want to know what are the factors that are contributing to those changes. And so we do research of various kinds. And banding loons is one of those research activities. So here are our biologist at large, Emma Purinton, our Lakes Region biologist, Jaden Jeck, and our senior biologist, John Cooley, going out to band loons on Red Hill Pond this summer. So when we banned loons, because despite their popularity, there's an awful lot that we still don't know about these birds. And even some basic aspects, like how long do loons live? Do they mate for life? Do they come back to the same lake year after year? What's their age at first reproduction? What's their reproductive output over their lifetimes? Where do our loons go in the wintertime? What are the migratory pathways that they use to get back and forth? Those questions until recently were unknown. And even today, they're still based on pretty limited data. And it's information that we feel we need to have if we're going to assure these birds of a good future here in our state. And so every loon that we banned gets an individual combination of loons. So there's only one loon anywhere in New Hampshire, anywhere in North America, for that matter, that has, say, a silver over orange band on the left leg and a red stripe over a blue dot on the right leg. When we see that loon again in future years, we can begin to follow that loon over its lifetime and get at all sorts of this types of important information. So here's our outreach and volunteer biologist, Caroline Hughes and Jaden, banding a loon on Lake Waukesha this summer. So this year so far, we have spent 28 nights banding. We've banded 19 new loons. We've also recaptured some older loons as well, loons that we had banded previously. Here are Caroline, Olivia, and Emma banding a loon on Manning Lake this summer. As long as we have a loon in the hand, we take a small sample of blood and we test that blood for lead, for other contaminants, for stress indicating hormones. We can look at blood parasites in that blood. We can even do genetics work on that blood. So here are our veterinary intern, Jill Hoysack, and John drawing a small sample of blood from a loon on Reservoir Pond. We also clip a couple of feathers. We can test those feathers for mercury. In the past, we've tested them for cyanobacteria toxins. We can do genetics on the feathers as well. So here are our biologist at large, Elena Batters, our monadnock biologist, Mary Caffrey, and Caroline clipping a feather of a loon on Stone Pond. There's nothing quite like holding a little loon chick. Here's our Winnipesaukee biologist, Griffin Archambault, on Muskilma Lake. So this chick is too small to band or take blood samples, but when we capture the adults, we hold the chicks for safekeeping and to keep the family together. We also collect inviable loon eggs from failed nests. So here is Olivia processing a loon egg she collected this summer. This is one of 95 eggs we collected from failed nests in 2021. We will test some of those eggs for mercury and some for a wide range of other contaminants as well. We also work to rescue loons in distress. This loon was swept over the dam of Scatutakee Lake after a big storm event, dropped a lot of rain on that lake. Here's Brett Thielen from the Harris Center holding that exhausted loon after a pretty exhaustive effort by Brett and her husband Russ and LPC staff to find and rescue this bird. Our monadnock biologist Mary ended up hiking a half a mile through the woods with this loon under her arm. And here it is being released by Russ and Elena after a few days of rehabilitation. So the first step for many of these rescued loons is to get a radiograph or an X-ray. This is Jaden and John at Meadow Pond Veterinary Hospital with a sick loon that they picked up on White Lake. And sadly, that radiograph showed an ingested metal fishing tackle. So here's John testing that loon's blood for lead at LPC's laboratory. It had a lethal level of lead. So this was Jaden's first day working for the Loon Preservation Committee, and he spent part of it having to euthanize a loon. Other loons were luckier though. Here are our biologists at large, Kaylee McDonald and Jill and John banding a loon that we rescued from Balch Lake. And here are Kaylee and John releasing that loon. So this is one of 8 rescued loons we've been able to release back into the wild so far this year. And another is still being rehabilitated and will soon be released with any luck. Our less fortunate loons have historically gone to Mark Pokris, a veterinarian at the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine at Tufts University. And we send these loons to Mark because one of the best ways of finding out what's affecting loons at a population level is to determine what's killing individuals. So we've been sending dead loons to Mark since the mid-1980s, and he's been telling us what they died of. This, for example, is how we found out about the problem of lead fishing tackle in our loons. Mark retired a few years ago, but not really. He has continued to help us. And one of the many ways Mark continues to help us is by sending great veterinary students our way. So here is Jill doing a necropsy this summer in our newly upgraded research lab at the Loon Center. This is a bird from Winnipesaukee that died of injuries from a boat strike. Ingested lead fishing tackle continues to be the largest cause of known adult loon mortalities in New Hampshire. So far this year, we've had 4 lead poisoned mortalities, which is 4 too many, but fewer than we've collected at this point in many other years. This is the 4th year of our lead tackle buyback program to give out $10 vouchers to people who hand in old lead tackle at participating tackle shops so they can buy loon safe, non-toxic tackle. And this year, we've even sweetened that deal because the person returning the largest amount of lead tackle at each one of these participating tackle shops, LPC will send them a check for $100. The person returning the second largest amount will get a check from us for $50. So we are serious about getting this lead out of our lakes and out of our loons. Please visit loonsafe.org for details and a list of retailers participating in that program. So far, we've collected over 25,000 pieces of lead tackle as a result of this program. Any one of those would have killed a loon or other water bird if they had been ingested. Here's our lead tackle buyback campaign manager, Sheridan Brown, spreading the word at the Meredith Ice Fishing Derby early this year. We also work in other ways to minimize human impacts on loons. So we float nesting rafts to help loons that have been displaced from their traditional nesting sites because of shoreline development. And these rafts float, so they also help loons on lakes with changing water levels because they go up and down as those water levels change. Here's John floating a raft on Kalalamuk Lake with LPC volunteers Jerry Cooper and Dave Beardsley this spring. And here are LPC trustee Annie Montgomery and volunteer Chris Lockwood floating a raft on Sunapee. This is one of 101 rafts we floated this year, which tied our all-time record for the number of rafts floated on New Hampshire's lakes in any year. 30% of the loon chicks hatched in New Hampshire this year came from a raft floated by a Loon Preservation Committee volunteer or staff member. So here's Griffin knowing that he's done something good for loons on Roberts Cove on Winnipesaukee. We also float signs and rope lines around nesting loons to give them a little bit of the space that they need to incubate those eggs and hatch their chicks. Here are Emma and Jaden building signs to put out on our lakes this year. Overall, we protected 135 nesting pairs with signs this year, and pairs protected by those signs hatched close to 60% of the chicks hatched in the state. Here's yours truly floating a sign on White Oak Pond. I always like to have at least one slide of me doing actual useful work so that I can convince the board and the staff that it happens. Even friends of field biologists were pressed into service for loons. This is Emma's friend Patrick floating one of our buoy type nesting area signs on Lower Kimball Pond. Once chicks are hatched, we sometimes float these caution loon chick signs to slow down boat traffic in brooding areas. This is Jaden transporting one of those signs on Wentworth Lake. And this is Tiffany Grade, our Squam Lakes biologist, floating another of those signs on Squam. Tiffany and LPC were able to continue our work to understand and reverse the declines of loons on Squam Lake this year, thanks to the generous support of donors to the Squam Lake Loon Initiative. We also worked with dam owners to maintain stable water levels during those critical loon nesting periods. And in the end, 85% of the chicks hatched in the state this year were helped by one or more of LPC's management activities. And we're confident that every loon benefited from our educational efforts. And those include educational signs posted at access points of lakes. Those are sometimes augmented with homemade signs. So here's a sign posted on Scatutakee Lake while the loon that went over the dam was being rehabilitated. In a normal year, I would tell you about all the exhibits and presentations and events given by LPC to date this year. This was not a normal year, of course. LPC was a co-sponsor of the New Hampshire Music Festival's Concert on the Water on Squam Lake, But our summer gala, our Loon Festival, our golf tournament were all canceled due to COVID. We carried on though, and we changed our tactics to reach people in different ways. Caroline continued to work hard to expand our new website. We have more information now on loon natural history, including the calls of the loon and loon behavior. And we have more information about our work in support of loons. Please do check us out at loon.org. This is the 8th year for LPC's Loon webcam. We actually had 96,000 views from people all over the United States and the world. LPC volunteer Bill Gassman and Caroline and Chris Conrad and John all put in a huge effort to broadcast this nesting pair of loons to the world. Caroline continues to publish the LPC e-newsletter, and that now goes out to over 5,300 people. She also updates our Facebook page. We're at over 6,800 followers and counting. Chris Conrad brings his unique style and his wisdom and insights on loons to our Twitter account that has grown to 500 followers. Our Instagram account has over 700 followers now, and our Thursday Night Nature Talk series continued to be online on our YouTube channel. So we've been working hard to get the word out in different ways this year. Our Loon Census is our annual effort to get as many people as we can out on the lakes between 8 and 9 o'clock a.m. on the third Saturday of every July. That's pretty much a solitary endeavor, so that went ahead. Here are census volunteers Peggy and Mark Longley counting loons on Red Hill Pond on July 17th. We had 510 people and at least one Labrador take part in that fine tradition. Despite gray skies and a little drizzle, we counted 521 loon adults and chicks in that 1 hour period, and those figures are rolled up into our season-long monitoring. So it's been a busy and challenging year. And like all nonprofits, we rely on our volunteers to help us in our work. So I want to take this moment to thank all of our volunteers and supporters for your help this year. We could not do this work without you. And soon enough, it was time to pull our rafts and signs off the water again to wait for another spring and another loon breeding season. And then take all that data that we collected over the course of the summer and enter it into LPC's database. And that's not exciting work, but it is important. And this year we entered a 46th year of data on loons and our work to preserve them into that database. And here are the results of that work. And so the good news is that in 2021, we had more than 5 times the number of paired loons as we had when we began our work back in 1975. And when I talk about paired loons, that's that red line on this graph. These are simply loons that pair up, that defend an area, and that have at least the potential to breed and to contribute to that next generation of loons. So we continued our upward climb. We actually set a new record of 324 loon pairs. And again, I will caution that these are all very preliminary numbers, and we're about to go through an exhaustive period of double and triple checking these numbers. So they may wobble up and down by a few pairs, but the trends we think are going to hold. And only a proportion of those paired adults actually breed. So actually create a nest and lay at least one egg in that nest. And so those are the nesting adults. And those adults, nesting adults were up strongly from last year. And sadly, that's where the good news ends, because chicks hatched and chicks surviving were both down from last year. And as nice as it is, to see that red line continue to grow, we have a long way to go before we reach, what we feel are historical numbers of loons and the carrying capacity for New Hampshire, which is the number of loons that we feel that our lakes should still be able to support. So that space between that red line and those 2 green lines represent a lot of lakes that are empty that we feel ought to have loons on them. If we go a little deeper into that data, we get these relative breeding success statistics. And so the blue line on this graph is the proportion of territorial pairs that nested. So this year, we had about 70% of our territorial pairs get down to the business of nesting, and that's right on the long-term average. The red line on this graph is hatching success. And this year that was just above 0.8 chicks hatched per nesting pair. And that's actually one of the worst results that we have seen in our monitoring. And the green line is chick survival. So 2 out of the 3 of the chicks that have hatched in New Hampshire this year have survived, at least as of a few days ago. And that's on the low side of average. If we put all those trends together, we get this figure, which is chicks surviving per territorial pair. So the red line on this graph is 0.48 chicks surviving per territorial pair. And that's the number that we know from research done by the Loon Preservation Committee and by other organizations. That's the number that we need to hit as often as not to maintain a stable loon population. And of course, we want to do more than just maintain. We want to continue to grow and continue to recover this loon population. So in 2021, we were substantially below that line. And this is an important graph because the periods of really strong growth in our New Hampshire loon population are the years where we spent a substantial number of consecutive years well above that line. And as you can see, more recently, it's been harder to stay above that line. And so our concern as we look at this graph is that as adult loons in New Hampshire continue to die because of lead fishing tackle, because of boat collisions, for any number of different reasons, where are the loon chicks going to be coming from to replace those adults? And so we've got to search pretty hard for some good news in these recent years, but there is one piece, which is that 6 out of the past 10 years, we've actually hit or exceeded that red line. So this year, 52% of loon nests throughout the state were successful. That's actually the same percentage as last year. The difference, though, is that last year, a majority of those nests hatched 2 chicks, whereas you can see this year, a majority of our loon nests hatch only 1 chick. And that's success light, but it's still success and we'll take it. But that deficit did make itself felt in the number of chicks hatched. Of the nests that failed, fully half of them fail for unknown reasons. And, a nest failure, it can happen in the blink of an eye. Unless we have human eyes or a camera on that nest, often we simply don't know what caused that nest failure. But of the known causes of nest failure, we humans play a role in most. And so human disturbance is obvious. This is just people getting too close to a loon on the nest and flushing that loon off the nest and causing a nest failure. Many predations, though, may have a human component as well, because populations of egg predators like raccoons and gulls have benefited from their close association with humans. And so the ready access to human garbage means that populations of these predators, they're fruitful, they multiply, their populations rise to unnaturally high levels, and then they put pressure on our loons and other wildlife. And some of these predations may well have happened after humans flushed that loon off the nest. And we bear some responsibility for flooding and stranding events as well, because many of our lakes in New Hampshire are impounded and we love to pave things. And so when heavy rainfall happens, rather than soaking into that ground, a lot of that water is running off right into our lakes where it's causing nest failures. And of course, wakes from boats and these new wake boats can also flood loon nests and wash eggs right out of those nests. And what else may have accounted for this poor breeding success this year? Well, it was the hottest June on record, and that didn't help. The benefit of long-term data sets like those that we have at Loon Preservation Committee is that we have data on loon nesting success in hot as well as cool summers. And what we found is that loons are a northern species and nesting loons don't fare well in warm temperatures. So we're continuing to research climate impacts, including management options to help loons cope with these rising temperatures that we're experiencing. We also saw a return of avian malaria this summer. So this is a slide showing a malaria parasite in the brain tissue of a New Hampshire loon that died from this disease. So we've had 2 confirmed and another possible death from this warm weather disease that is expanding northward into New Hampshire, likely as a result of those increasing temperatures. And many of the birds killed by avian malaria or lead tackle or boat collisions this summer were tending to nests or chicks. And when those adults were killed, it also doomed those eggs or those chicks. And then that record hot June was followed by a record wet July. And that means trouble for a bird that nests at the water's edge. So here are 2 loon eggs underwater at Robb Reservoir. And this scene was played out many times this summer. And it's not just the loons that have been challenged. LPC has been challenged too by our own success in increasing our loon population despite the increasing threats they're facing. Our loon center was built in 1993 for a staff of 4. Since then, our loon population has tripled. This year, we floated 3 times as many loon nesting rafts as we did in 1993. We gave 3 times the number of exhibits and presentations, even given COVID, and we protected more than 5 times the number of nesting loons with ropes and signs. We now have a year-round staff of 9, and with our seasonal biologists and the vet interns, we are up to 23 people at our high point this summer. And so we expanded and upgraded our loon center. And that now includes more office and lab and workspace and dedicated storage space for biological samples and field supplies and equipment. And this is the new Kitty and John Wilson Field Operations Center. It includes work and storage space for field equipment and boats and supplies, and housing for seasonal field biologists and veterinary interns above. And I just want to thank the many trustees, former trustees, and friends of LPC who helped us with our capital campaign and building project to create these great new facilities. So to wrap up, for our volunteers and staff, it was a summer of good work to benefit our loons. Sometimes under beautiful blue skies, and often not. This is a pretty typical field day this July. We dealt with the usual challenges of field work. Here's a picture of the driveway to Phil's housing in the Sunapee region. This actually happened twice to Phil over the summer. And here are Griffin and Emma resorting to paddle power after an engine failure on Winnipesaukee. But there were also moments of calm and tranquility, and a sense that our work had contributed to a brighter future for loons. Along the way, we celebrated some friendships that I'm sure will last. And our staff worked hard, and it was good and necessary work for our loons. And of course, there's still much work to be done. And the impacts of LPC's work go far beyond loons and far beyond New Hampshire. Loons are a sentinel of environmental quality. They're an indicator of the health of our aquatic ecosystems. They're scientifically important and they have a wide public appeal. And that's why they have found themselves to be a focal point of so many of our environmental issues. And that means that if we can save loons, then we can save a lot of other species that depend on the same clean water and quiet places. And I like to think that at the same time as we've been working to recover our loon population, we've also been working to encourage an environmental ethic. And ultimately, that's going to benefit not just loons, but also other wildlife and the people and the natural character of New Hampshire. And here's what it's all about. So this little loon chick being chased by both of its parents with food is the first loon chick recorded in Meredith Bay on Winnipesaukee since LPC began its work in 1975. May the future be bright for that chick and all of the others born on our lakes this year. And that is the end of my presentation, but I would love to answer any questions that folks have about loons or LPC's work in support of loons. And I'm hoping that, Caroline, you have some of those for me.
Yes, I do. So the first question that came in is about the banding and the sampling we do and whether we're doing any genetic work with that to sort of construct family trees for loons in New Hampshire.
Yeah. This is a great question. And, we routinely collect blood samples and feather samples from our loons, and we can do a number of different things on those samples. One of them is that genetics work. And in fact, we were working with a researcher from Buffalo State University in the past, and we're working with other researchers now who are doing a number of different studies on the genetics of loons. And there are an incredible amount of interesting things that have already come out of that research. And one of those is that loons are all pretty uniform genetically. And that could indicate actually that loons went through kind of an evolutionary bottleneck at some point in the not too distant past where their numbers were reduced to a fairly small number before they bred up, again, and created more loons. But that limited genetic diversity is also a danger sign for our loons, because it means that loons may be more susceptible to diseases. Without a lot of that genetic diversity, it's possible that a single disease or a small number of diseases could come and wipe out those loons. And so it's another reason for caution in dealing with our loon populations. Other genetics work has been done to try and kind of genotype different loons. And so it turns out that you can tell a loon from the Northeast, from a loon from the Midwest in terms of a slightly different genetic makeup. And that could also be helpful at some point if we're looking for the identity of a loon that is not banded. We may be able to trace that loon back to some sort of point of origin for a breeding population. So a lot of great work being done. More will be done in the future. And many of these blood samples that we have are archived in order to deal with research questions that we haven't even thought to ask yet.
We have a question about how can we educate new boaters and teach them to slow down in chick areas. This is a woman who was on Squam and says that she saw so many boaters speeding through areas where they probably should have been more careful.
Yes, yeah. And so Tiffany Grade, our Squam Lakes biologist, is famous for peppering, Squam Lake with loon signs, both loon nesting area signs and these caution loon chicks signs. And in fact, maybe I shouldn't say this, but sometimes when we're banding signs, we have to hide some under a tarp so that Tiffany won't find all of them and put them all right out on Squam. So it's a little disheartening, to hear that people on Squam are zooming by and maybe not paying so much attention to these signs. I think it's got to be a continual process of education from the Loon Preservation Committee, but also from people's peers on the lake. And so I think it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly to people if somebody comes down to the end of the of their dock, and says, hey, you may want to give those loons a little bit more space, or could you slow down around that loon area? And it doesn't take long for the word to get out that on this lake, people love their loons, and you want to be a little bit careful in your interactions with them. And so, changing people's values and attitudes, it can be a slow process. It can take time. In the meantime, we'll do what we can to continue to put out the signs and incorporate that into each one of our talks as well, just to try and get the word out there about loons and the need to give them a little bit of space so that they can do their thing, do the things that they need to do to feed themselves, to keep themselves safe, and to raise those chicks.
And sort of a follow-up question that I can address a little bit. Does LPC coordinate with rental boat companies to educate boat renters to slow down when they see those loon caution areas? The answer to that is yes, we have been working with rental companies and property rental companies as well on Squam, Winnipesaukee, and Lake Sunapee. Those companies have been great. If you are on a lake that has a rental agency that you'd like us to work with, please send me an email at volunteers@loon.org. Likewise, if you're someone who rents out your house on Airbnb and you'd like to provide education to your renters, you can also reach out to me. I'm glad to help distribute our educational materials.
Great. Thank you, Caroline. Good.
Yeah. Okay. There are some questions about the census and how there's a little bit of discrepancy between census loon counts and our total final loon count. So could you talk about where that comes from and also how the census numbers compare to past years?
Oh, sure. Yeah. This is a great question. The census is such a great tool. And the census helps us with many things. One of the things, of course, is that if we're monitoring 350 lakes and we're trying to do that with 8 or 9 field biologists, that's a lot of lakes for each of our biologists. And in some cases, our biologists are hard pressed to get to those lakes once every 1 or 2 weeks, and do 3 or 4 visits to those lakes over that period. And that's one of the reasons why volunteers are so important. They help to fill in the gaps for what we, as our limited number of field biologists, cannot do as nearly as well as a volunteer who's on that lake and who has eyes and ears on that lake all the time. The census is a great event because it's an effort to get a snapshot in time of our loon population. So every year at the census, we become aware of chicks that we didn't know were there before. Even we can be made aware of new loon pairs. Sometimes if we have a couple of lakes that may or may not be being shared by a loon pair, because that can sometimes happen with loon pairs. If we have census participants on both of those lakes and they both record a pair of loons, we've just found out the answer, to that question. Now, having said that, we try and get as many people as we can out on these lakes, but we don't have full coverage of these lakes. And so the census numbers are typically less complete than the numbers that we can get by combining those census numbers with all of the various volunteer observations and field staff volunteer observations that have happened over the entire summer season. So the census numbers are rolling up into that. But they're not the whole story for our loon population. And as for how they compared last year, I know that we actually increased the number of folks that took part in the census this year over last year, which was great because, as I did say, it was kind of a gray and drizzly day and did not deter our field volunteers. But Caroline, I can't recall, did we actually count more loons this year as well? I'm putting you on the spot because...
We counted a few more loons. I'd say it's within the ballpark of what we normally count. And part of that is because we had a lot of new volunteers this year who were interested in covering lakes that we at LPC classify as a tier 3 lake, which is a lake that has really good loon habitat, but might not necessarily have loons living on it yet. And that data is just as important to collect as, data on loons that are there, right? The negative data helps to fill in the picture for us as well. So even though we had more people participating, we had just a few more loons documented than in previous years.
Absolutely. And it's an incredibly important point that Caroline raises as well, because it may not seem exciting or useful to report that you did not see any loons during your loon census, but as biologists, that's actually very valuable data. So whether or not you saw a loon during the census, please return those census forms to us and let us know what you saw.
And then we had sort of similar questions come in on Zoom and in YouTube, which is about loons. Are they nesting further north or moving further north to cope with climate changes? And are there ways that we might be able to track that, such as GPS trackers or other technology like that? Yeah.
So this is another great question. So, loons are a northern species. So the northern edge of their breeding range extends far beyond the northern end of New Hampshire. And frankly, loons that are that far north, because there are fewer people up there, we probably don't have as great a sense of their distribution, their productivity numbers, mortality numbers, and things of that nature. So it's a hard question to answer about what that northern limit of a loon's range is doing. Frankly, here in New Hampshire, we are more concerned about the southern limit of that loon's range because we are pretty close to that southern limit here in New Hampshire. And so loons are breeding in Massachusetts. And they were actually extirpated from that state, but then they established a foothold in the Quabbin Reservoir, and from there expanded to the Wachusett Reservoir, and now they're expanding to other lakes surrounding those reservoirs as well. And apparently there's even a single pair in the extreme northwestern tip of Connecticut. So, but that's the very southern extent of the loon's range. And the big question is what is going to happen to that range as our climate continues to warm and as climate change brings with it more severe rain events and storm events. Both of those things are bad for a northern species that nests right at the water's edge. So we are playing out the grand experiment of climate change in so many ways. And one of the ways is with our loon population here in New Hampshire. Caroline's thesis actually dealt in large part with that very issue, and also what LPC can do to help loons cope with those changes. And as a result of Caroline's fine work, we are actually retrofitting our rafts, our nesting rafts now with shade fabric that reflects UV light. And we figure that may well buy us many decades of warming for our loon population simply by keeping these loons cooler on the nest. And that's when loons are most vulnerable, because that's when they can't dangle, their feet and much of their bodies in that nice cool water.
Do loons ever stay in salt water and try to breed there?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. I mean, this is another great question. And, and no one was here to see this, of course, but one of the theories about why loons have this kind of mixed life cycle with, spending winters on the ocean and summers on freshwater lakes is that as loons evolved and became more and more specialized for fishing, one of the key things that happened to them is that the legs kept on moving further and further back towards the back of the body, which is great for swimming, but it's all wrong for walking on land. One of the consequences of that may well have been that loons could no longer cope with tides. And so when the tide went out, these loons were simply not mobile enough to get back up to their nests. And what do you do in that case? Well, maybe you just fly inland to a freshwater lake where there are no tides. And so that is one of the theories anyway about why loons began to breed on fresh water. And I'm not aware of any loons. There may have been one report in the literature, kind of an anecdote of a loon that had successfully bred on salt water, but it is not at all commonly done. And it's virtually unheard of for loons to do that.
And then we have a question from one of our volunteers. Their lake did not have chicks this year, but she's just started seeing an immature loon showing up these last couple of days. And so she's wondering, why would an immature be showing up on a New Hampshire lake now?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, that immature loon could be a young of the year because our juveniles at this point have grown, and loons actually got an early start in nesting this year. So many of those chicks are actually pretty large. They'd be just about the same size as the adults by this time. It could also be a second-year loon that has come in from New Hampshire. Every year, we get 6 or 10 of these immature loons. Because loons will not actually breed or molt into their breeding plumage, which we actually call their alternate plumage, until they're about 26 months old. So those first couple of years, they're spent out on the ocean, and they look very much like a loon chick. So it's actually probably hard to tell them apart at this time of the year. So you may have a chick that's flown in from a neighboring lake. It could actually be a loon that flew in from the ocean and is spending a little bit of time on New Hampshire's lakes. But the reason it's on your lake is probably because it's not claimed by another loon. And I would expect that maybe the fishing is good on that lake. And so they've just decided to stay there for a little while.
And then there's a question about loons that stay in the saltwater over the summer, for example, offshore of Maine and New Hampshire. Are those the teenagers who aren't mature enough to breed?
Yes, probably those are 2- and 3-year-old loons, and those loons, well, many of them will still be in the juvenile plumage, that drab gray plumage. Some of them, though, might be in that black and white plumage. And when they molt, often the first time a loon molts into that black and white plumage, it's happening, kind of middle of the summer, and sometimes it's simply too late for those loons to fly inland and breed. And as loons get older and older, that molt begins to happen for more and more early in the year, and that's one of the things that allows these loons to get off of the ocean and come in and have a chance to grab a territory of their own and breed, and again contribute to that next generation of loons. And so you're probably seeing a mix, of second-year loons. And older loons. And at this time of year, you're probably also seeing some loons that have already packed it in, as far as a breeding attempts, and have just decided that they're going back to the ocean. And so spring migration is very quick, and loons are in a rush to get back to these lakes and claim their new breeding territories and get started with that whole breeding process. Summer migration is pretty protracted, and loons with chicks will tend to stay for a lot longer. They may still be on our lakes in November, sometimes, into December, but many of the loons at this point that didn't breed or sadly lost their chicks or lost their eggs are already beginning to wander around to different lakes. And some of them have probably already left for the ocean.
Great. Well, that is the end of our questions, it looks like.
Great. All right. Well, fantastic. So that wraps up our annual meeting. It wraps up our Thursday night nature talk. And I want once again, say thank you to all of our volunteers, to all of our supporters, everyone who has helped us in this work to recover loons in any of a number of ways. We could not do this work without you. Thank you for your support, and thank you for tuning in to our meeting. And anybody who is hearing this, please do come and visit us at the Loon Center. We are open all winter. Our schedule is a bit reduced in the winter times. We're open to the public Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays. But please do drop in, and we would be happy to give you a tour of the new facilities, answer any questions that you have about loons, and talk about the work of the Loon Preservation Committee to keep this population strong and growing.
Great. Well, have a great night, everybody.
Thank you all. Good night.